They said she starved herself, but when they found her, her fingernails were black, her eyes hollowed like burned-out lanterns, and her journal, soaked in blood and ink, filled with symbols no one could translate, not even the church. The year was 1903. The body was Evelyn Greystone, last of the Greystone line, heiress to a fortune soaked in madness. Her family estate, Greystone Hollow, had stood for nearly a century as a beacon of old wealth and New England dignity. But beneath the manicured gardens and limestone halls, something was rotting. You were never meant to hear this story, because what Eleanor recorded in her final weeks would expose a system older than America, a network of minds broken and rebuilt in secret chambers beneath the ivy of privilege. This is not a ghost story. This is psychological warfare disguised as heritage. Greystone Hollow wasn't just a house, it was a breeding ground, a generational experiment in mental manipulation, institutional submission, and the slow corruption of the human soul under the banner of refinement. The Greystone family wasn't cursed. They were designed, selected, conditioned, used. And Eleanor was the first to disobey. Inside the margins of her diary, she left clues, names, dates, rituals, and codes, a confession written not in despair, but in defiance. But to read her words is to risk understanding. And once you understand, you don't come back the same. There are families you've never heard of, names removed from textbooks, legacies scrubbed from archives, bloodlines intertwined with your institutions, your churches, your courts. The Greystones were one of them, and Eleanor's death wasn't a tragedy. It was a signal, a warning encoded in madness. They teach you to be obedient by breaking what makes you human first. If you've made it this far, you already feel it. The fracture in the mirror, the itch in the back of your skull that something has always been wrong with the world. It's time you learn why. This is the Lost Diaries of the Greystone Heiress, Confessions of Madness. You won't sleep the same again. The diary was recovered in winter, buried beneath the floorboards of Eleanor's childhood nursery, a room sealed since 1897, locked by her father after what the family publicly called a nervous incident. But what was found was no child's keepsake, no journal of polite sorrow or girlish whimsy. It was a ledger of torment, each page scratched with the handwriting of a mind unraveling, and yet there was method. Dates aligned, names repeated, drawings mirrored patterns found in 15th century grimoires, and mathematical symbols that had no place in a debutante's education. She wrote of the pale room, of the men in silver masks, of nightly examinations performed not by doctors, but by men she referred to as watchmakers. They didn't heal her. They studied her. The hollow, she wrote, was a place where time doesn't move forward, only deeper. And the family, all of them, were prisoners, locked in a generational pact with something that didn't bleed, but fed. The Greystones made their fortune in textiles, coal, and eventually in psychological treatment centers. Philanthropy, they called it. But behind those brick walls were clinics with no exit. And Eleanor remembered. She remembered her uncle's screams at night, the sharp, bitter scent of chloroform, the humming of electrical devices beneath the floorboards, and the way they taught her to forget her own name over and over again until it didn't belong to her anymore. There's a word for what she experienced. Programming. Not the digital kind, but the ancient kind. The kind where you rewrite a human mind using trauma, ritual, and repetition. Break the self. Rebuild the shell. Control the outcome. Eleanor described her handlers as tutors. But their lessons were not algebra or piano. They taught her to disassociate, to compartmentalize, to present the perfect smile while burying the scream so deep it became silence. She wasn't insane. She was engineered. And if you think this is just her story, think again. The institutions that did this to her are still here. They've changed names, upgraded methods, but the goal remains the same. Break the mind, shape the will, control the bloodline. This isn't history, it's doctrine. And now that you've heard the first whisper, the descent begins. Because if you knew what was really done to the children of the elite, you'd never trust a legacy again. Greystone Hollow wasn't always a house. Before the Greystone family claimed it, before the limestone facade and Georgian columns were ever built, the land bore another name: Witch's Gate. Local legends whispered of disappearances in the early 1700s, of burnt circles that would appear in the grass after thunderstorms, of a colonial priest who vanished with 13 children, all of whom had been marked with a red wax sigil on their wrists. But when the Greystones arrived in 1814, they brought wealth and silence. They paved over history with stone and sanctimony. They built their hollow upon cursed earth and called it legacy. Eleanor's diary hinted at what lay beneath the estate. Below the third basement, she wrote, the air is colder, time flickers, I lose hours. She described rooms with no light source, yet no shadows. Hallways where her voice echoed wrong, delayed, distorted, and a chamber lined with mirrors that reflected not her face, but what they made her become. They called it the reflection room. It was where the final stage of obedience was tested. If the subject could stand in front of the glass for 7 minutes without screaming, they were ready. Eleanor never made it past 5. And yet, she remembered. She remembered what her older brother forgot, because when he emerged from those rooms, he was no longer the boy she knew. He was clean, controlled. He recited prayers he'd never been taught. He spoke Latin in his sleep, and when Eleanor tried to touch him, he recoiled, as if she were the infection. That's what these systems do. They don't just manipulate behavior, they erase the soul, until you become what they want, compliant, disconnected, incapable of rebellion. And when rebellion does stir, it's labeled madness. They put you in a padded room, they give you pills, shock, diagnoses. But what if madness was simply the memory fighting its ways? Yai back. Eleanor wasn't mad. She was awakening. And in her writing she described symbols, circular diagrams intersecting triangles, eyes within stars. You've seen them. Etched in old cathedrals, hidden in corporate logos, tattooed on the wrists of the chosen. These are not coincidences. They are markers, signs of allegiance to an ancient method of control. The Greystones were not victims of a curse. They were caretakers of it. And Eleanor, she was the anomaly. Eleanor once wrote, "They taught me to obey before I ever knew the word freedom." She wasn't raised. She was conditioned. The Hollow wasn't merely a home. It was a laboratory masquerading as a manor. Every hallway, every painting, every ritual supper, designed to fracture identity and reinforce hierarchy. Even the lullabies whispered to her at night weren't songs. They were scripts. One entry in her diary details a recurring dream she had as a child. A tall man in black robes stood over her crib, whispering a phrase she couldn't understand. But decades later, while reading a text on pre-Masonic rites found in the Greystone Library, she recognized the phrase word for word. It was an invocation, one used in the ceremonial induction of vessels. They weren't raising children, they were preparing containers. Containers for what? For programs, for personalities, for spirits. You see, when a child's mind is shattered at a young age through trauma, isolation, and ritualized abuse, something terrifying happens. They disassociate so deeply that alternate personas form. And in those fragments you can implant commands, memories, even entire fabricated identities. That is not conspiracy. That is textbook psychological warfare. It's called monarch conditioning. But back then, it was known by another name, the doctrine of the veil, used by cults, aristocrats, and even churches to raise generations of obedient actors, individuals with no memory of their other selves, until triggered. Eleanor's brother, Julian, was one such actor. Publicly, he was a charitable businessman. Privately, he was part of the society her diary only refers to as the Chamber of 13. Men and women who met beneath candlelight, masks concealing faces, though not identities. Because Eleanor knew, she saw them. One night in 1902, she followed Julian through a side passage behind the East Library shelf, down staircases not listed on any blueprint, into a chamber that smelled of copper, blood, and roses. There they chanted in unison, not prayers, commands, to bind, to erase, to break. And at the center of the room was not an altar, but a child. The moment she stepped forward, Julian saw her and smiled. "Welcome home, sister," he said. She wasn't an intruder. She was expected. That was the moment Eleanor knew. She wasn't meant to escape. She was meant to become. The transformation had already begun. Eleanor wrote that after witnessing the ritual beneath Greystone Hollow, she lost 3 entire days. No memory, no dreams, just black. When she awoke, she was in her own bed, her gown clean, her diary missing, and her left wrist bandaged. Beneath the gauze was something new, a brand, a circular emblem of an eye surrounded by thorns, burned into her skin. She wasn't born into privilege. She was claimed by it. The branding wasn't punishment, it was initiation. She hadn't broken the rules. She had followed them exactly and arrived at the next level. But something within her resisted, something old, something untainted. She began to hear the whispers again, but now they spoke in her own voice. A second Eleanor, buried deeper than the programming. The self before the fracture, before the obedience, and it wanted out. In one passage, Eleanor describes a moment of clarity. "I looked in the mirror, and I didn't blink. She did. I moved my hand. She hesitated. I smiled. She wept. That is how I knew which of us was real. Multiple personalities, or a soul trying to return to its stolen body. This is what they don't teach you about the elite. The further up you go, the more fragmented they become. Because power is never given to the whole, it's given to the broken, those who can be reshaped. What happened at Greystone wasn't an isolated experiment, it was part of a network. Eleanor's writings reference other estates, Rose Hall, Calvin Gate, Belwick Abbey, all with similar floor plans, all connected to the same trust. The Vale Foundation, a charitable organization founded in 1783 by members of a forgotten Masonic order known as the Order of the Hollow Crown. And every beneficiary of their schools, clinics, and homes shared one thing in common: obedience beyond comprehension. But Eleanor, despite everything, started to remember. He began writing in hidden ink. She mapped out the rituals, she decoded the hymns, and she discovered a truth that burned through her like fire. The same system that breaks the mind can be reversed. Halfway through the diary, her tone changes. The trembling hand becomes steady. The fearful girl becomes a weapon. And if you're still watching, I want you to do something. Type this in the comments below: I am not what they made me. Twice. Once for the algorithm, and once for yourself. Because you're not here by accident. You're here because something inside you is waking up, and what comes next will change everything. From this point on, Eleanor stopped writing like a victim. She wrote like a strategist. Each entry read more like reconnaissance than reflection. She catalogued the movements of staff, the subtle signs of conditioning in her family, even the architecture, doors that led nowhere, windows that opened into darkness. She was drawing a map of the machine. Because that's what Greystone Hollow was. A machine built not of gears and steel, but of ritual and control, and its fuel was trauma. The deeper she explored the estate's forbidden wings, the more patterns emerged. A hidden ledger in the cellar recorded shipments not of goods, but people. Children from orphanages across the Northeast, delivered under philanthropic programs, each with an evaluation report, each with a 3-letter code Eleanor couldn't decipher until she found a torn letter in her father's desk. It was correspondence from the Hollow Crown. It referenced sub-persona installs, Phase 2 breakthroughs, and chillingly, Asset 72, regression failure. That was her. She was Asset 72. She wasn't mad. She was labeled defective. Eleanor had resisted the program, not because she was stronger, but because something older was inside her. A memory that predated the programming, a knowledge they hadn't been able to erase. She began remembering things she was never taught. Sacred geometry, dead languages. The true meanings behind religious texts recited backward during initiation ceremonies, and she saw for the first time the blueprint of control, break the identity. Install the narrative, create loyalty not through love, but dependency. This is the core tactic of psychological empires. They do not tell you what to believe, they fracture you so completely that you beg for belief. And when you believe what they give you, you become harmless. Eleanor saw this in her mother's eyes. A woman once fierce, read you, said to a docile, medicated whisper. She wasn't cruel. She was programmed to be silent. But silence is brittle, and Eleanor had learned to speak in codes. She began slipping phrases into conversations, humming counter-frequencies, planting disruptive patterns into the family's rituals. Tiny rebellions, each one a crack in the mirror. That's how you dismantle control systems. Not with rage, but with knowledge. Targeted, precise, and unrelenting. And Eleanor, she was no longer asking questions. She was preparing for war. They noticed. When systems of control are threatened, they don't attack with brute force. They respond with isolation. First, Eleanor's diary vanished. Then her room was moved to the North Tower, the coldest part of Greystone Hollow. No fireplace, no mirror, no contact with the outside world. But Eleanor had already adapted. She no longer needed warmth, comfort, or mirrors. She had already begun the process of internal reconstruction. You see, once you identify the mechanisms of your own conditioning, you begin to disassemble them. Piece by piece, fear by fear, lie by lie. In the margins of a hymn book left in her new quarters, she scratched a phrase. The soul can be rethreaded if the weave is known. She wasn't just resisting the system, she was hijacking it. At night, she listened. Footsteps outside her door revealed the schedule of the wardens. Creaks in the ceiling told her which hallways were hollow. She learned the patterns, because control always operates on rhythms. Even madness has a metronome. Then came the visit. Her brother Julian, older now, serene, polished. He entered without knocking and sat across from her in silence. After several minutes he spoke. You've seen too much, but you still have a choice. He offered her a drink, not wine. Milk. The same milk they gave her as a child before the rituals. Laced with something to make the mind soft. She refused. That was when Julian's face changed. Not in expression, in shape. Eleanor described it as watching a mask melt. Behind the familiar face was something far colder. Eyes like polished slate, and a voice that vibrated not in the ears, but in the bones. You were supposed to be the vessel, it said. Not the sister, not the daughter. The vessel, a living container for... What? That's the piece they don't want you to understand. Control systems, especially ancient ones, are not always human. Use human systems. But what they serve, what inhabits, is something else. Call it a force, call it a pattern, call it what Eleanor called it in the final pages of her second diary, the quiet monarch. A presence that doesn't speak but commands, doesn't rule but rewrites, and they were trying to put it inside her. Now you know why she screamed in her sleep. Eleanor understood, finally, what Greystone Hollow had always been. A chrysalis. A place where minds were broken, reshaped and prepared to carry something not born of flesh, but of will. An invasive architecture, a parasite of identity. And the quiet monarch wasn't a demon or deity, it was worse. It was a system of thought so refined, so cold, so perfect in its logic, that once inside you, you no longer resisted it. You believed it had always been you. This is the final stage of control. Fusion. Eleanor wrote that most vessels never knew. They lived out their lives in boardrooms, pulpits, clinics and courts, thinking every decision they made was their own. But inside, the monarch ruled. That's why rebellion is so rare among the elite. Not because they are incapable of resistance, but because they've forgotten what resisting even feels like. But Eleanor remembered, because her fracture never sealed properly. The trauma failed to take hold. She had seen herself in the mirror, the real self, before the system could fully overwrite her. And that meant she was dangerous. She had something they feared, an unaltered will. So they tried something else. A second visitor came to her tower room weeks later. An old woman, dressed in mourning black. Eyes milky, skin like parchment. She claimed to be Eleanor's grandmother, but Eleanor had no grandmother. Both her father's and mother's parents had died before she was born, or so she'd been told. The woman carried a box. Black velvet, no hinges. Inside, a single object. A porcelain mask shaped like a child's face, cracked, worn, and wet with something that shimmered like oil. She offered it to Eleanor and said, "It is time you return." Return to what? To who? The diary records her next move in trembling script. "I did not take the mask, I shattered it. And when I did, the walls began to bleed." Literal, symbolic, both. Becca used Greystone Hollow was never just stone and wood. It was alive. A thought form given structure. A house built from belief. And when Eleanor rejected the belief, the illusion began to collapse. Here's what they never tell you. If enough of us reject the mask, the system can't hold. But that takes more than courage. It takes memory. And most of us have already been made to forget. But not you. You're still watching. And that means you remember something too, don't you? After the mask shattered, everything changed. Eleanor described it as a slippage. Walls no longer held shape. Doors led to rooms that shouldn't exist. The sky outside her tower window flickered, blue one moment, rust red the next. This wasn't hallucination. This was deprogramming. Because once the core belief collapses, reality, your engineered reality, begins to glitch. You see, most people think control is enforced with chains, but chains are crude. The real chains are constructs of perception, rules etched into the mind, and when Eleanor broke hers, Greystone Hollow began to bleed through its own lie. She found herself wandering the manor at night, unnoticed. No one stopped her, no one even saw her, because she no longer moved within the system's rules. And that is when she found the Sanctorium, a hidden library beneath the east wing, the entry concealed behind a fireplace that hadn't burned since her birth. Inside, books made of skin, scrolls inked in languages dead for 3,000 years, photographs of people who never aged, and in the center, on a pedestal of iron, the Ledger of Ascension. This was the truth. A record of every vessel cultivated over the last 400 years. Names, dates, codes, outcomes, and her name was in it. Marked in red, T2E, partial failure, retain self-awareness, terminate or reintegrate before age 33. She was 31. This wasn't just a haunting, this was a countdown, because once the window closed, reintegration would be impossible. Eleanor would become what they had designed, a carrier of the quiet monarch. She wouldn't even know it. She'd believe she was fine. She'd move into public life. She'd heal. But behind her smile, behind her decisions, it would be there, guiding her, feeding. This is how the world is ruled. Not by presidents, not by generals, but by vessels who don't even know they're vessels. You see it now, don't you? How our culture elevates the broken, the molded, the compliant. How those who speak truth are medicated, marginalized, erased. But Eleanor wasn't erased. Because she did something few ever do, she made a counter-program, a ritual not of submission, but of awakening. And she buried it in the place they'd never look, in herself. Do you want to know what she did next? Eleanor had no weapons, no allies, no chance. But what she had was access. She knew the rituals, she knew the architecture of the lie, and more importantly, she knew when they would try to reintegrate her. The date was carved into the final page of the Ascension Ledger, October 31st, 1904, her 33rd birthday. The ritual would be held beneath the manor, in the reflection room. This wasn't coincidence. It never is. Dates like that are keys. Because power loves symmetry, so the master number, a symbol of transformation, sacrifice, and rebirth. But Eleanor wasn't going to be reborn. She was going to end it. In the final weeks leading up to the ritual, she pretended to comply. She sang the hymns, took the milk, recited the mantras, but all the while she was writing something. Not in her diary this time, in herself. She began tattooing words into her skin. Runes, ancient syllables, a counter-liturgy known only to a few initiates of a forgotten sect, the children of the hollow reversal. Where did she learn it? From the voices that had never left her. The original Eleanor. The one who never broke. The one who lived deep in the silence, watching, waiting, and remembering. These words weren't decoration, they were code. And on the night of the ritual, when the chamber filled with firelight and chanting, when the quiet monarch began to descend into her, she spoke them aloud. 12 syllables, one for each member of the chamber, and the 13th to unbind the system itself. Here's what the records say. The lights failed. The candles blew out. The glass cracked inward, and every member present began to convulse. Some say it was a seizure. Others claimed it was a mass hallucination. But one survivor, an aged servant named O'Connell, claimed that Eleanor never screamed. She stood motionless in the center of the circle, her eyes black, her skin glowing with symbols, and then she vanished. Not escaped, not fled, vanished. They never found her body, not in the room, not in the hollow, not in the world they controlled. But 6 months later, copies of her second diary began appearing, mailed anonymously to libraries, doctors, dissidents, you. And now, you're reading this story, you're watching it unfold, because the ritual didn't kill her, it released her. She became something they couldn't trace, couldn't silence, couldn't own. She became memory unchained, still with me. By now, you understand, this isn't a ghost story. It's a manual, a weapon forged in pages, a spell hidden inside confession. Evelyn Greystone didn't escape the system. She inverted it. Her disappearance wasn't the end. It was the infection point. Because what she did in that chamber, the words she spoke, the frequency she unleashed, wasn't designed to destroy a room. It was meant to fracture a network. To loosen the bindings on every other vessel who had ever been programmed, silenced, or broken under the quiet monarch's reign, and it worked. After October 31st, 1904, things began to change. Records from orphanages across the Northeast show a dramatic spike in unexplainable awakenings. Children who'd been catatonic suddenly speaking in strange tongues. Women institutionalized for hysteria, writing entire volumes in symbols matching Eleanor's skin markings. Men in industrial labor camps carving reverse pentagrams into stone and muttering prayers not from the Bible, but from somewhere else. The quiet monarch had been wounded, not slain, but wounded, because Eleanor had broken its rhythm. And in doing so she opened a space, a fracture in the veil, a silence between the signals, a doorway. This is why Greystone Hollow was abandoned less than a year later. Why the Greystone Trust was dissolved. Why every remaining family member either vanished, committed suicide, or died under bizarre and horrific circumstances. Because Eleanor wasn't just an escaped subject. She became a carrier of the reversal. A living algorithm that undoes obedience. But not through force, through remembrance. Her diaries weren't just confessions, they were keys. And here's the part that changes everything. The symbols Eleanor wrote on her body, they've been found again, etched into cave walls in Eastern Europe, in ancient monasteries sealed since the 1500s, even in Mayan temples buried beneath jungle rot. She didn't invent them. She recalled them. Because this war isn't new. It's older than language, older than empires. older than even the monarch itself, and the battlefield is always the same, the human soul. So if you felt it, that aching sense that something is watching, that your choices don't quite feel like your own, that your dreams carry symbols you don't understand, you're not broken, you're remembering. And Eleanor's voice is reaching you now, through me, through this. And if you're ready to go deeper, by now you understand this isn't a ghost story, it's a manual, a weapon forged in pages, a spell hidden inside confession. Evelyn Greystone didn't escape the system, she inverted it. Her disappearance wasn't the end, it was the infection point. Because what she did in that chamber, the words she spoke, the frequency she unleashed, wasn't designed to destroy a room. It was meant to fracture a network, to loosen the bindings on every other vessel who had ever been programmed, silenced, or broken under the quiet monarch's reign, and it worked. After October 31st, 1904, things began to change. Records from orphanages across the Northeast show a dramatic spike in unexplainable awakenings. Children who'd been catatonic suddenly speaking in strange tongues. Women institutionalized for hysteria, writing entire volumes in symbols matching Eleanor's skin markings. Men in industrial labor camps carving reverse pentagrams into stone and muttering prayers not from the Bible, but from somewhere else. The quiet monarch had been wounded, not slain, but wounded, because Eleanor had broken its rhythm. And in doing so she opened a space, a fracture in the veil, a silence between the signals, a doorway. This is why Greystone Hollow was abandoned less than a year later. Why the Greystone Trust was dissolved. Why every remaining family member either vanished, committed suicide, or died under bizarre and horrific circumstances. Because Eleanor wasn't just an escaped subject, she became a carrier of the reversal. A living algorithm that undoes obedience, but not through force, through remembrance. Her diaries weren't just confessions, they were keys. And here's the part that changes everything. The symbols Eleanor wrote on her body, they've been found again, etched into cave walls in Eastern Europe, in ancient monasteries sealed since the 1500s, even in Mayan temples buried beneath jungle rot. She didn't invent them, she recalled them, because this war isn't new. It's older than language, older than empires, older than even the monarch itself, and the battlefield is always the same, the human soul. So if you felt it, that aching sense that something is watching, that your choices don't quite feel like your own, that your dreams carry symbols you don't understand, you're not broken, you're remembering. And Eleanor's voice is reaching you now, through me, through this. And if you're ready to go deeper, by now you feel it, the tightening in your chest, the tremor beneath the skin. It's not just the story, it's the signal, because Eleanor's truth isn't just information, it's activation, and once it enters you, it begins changing how you see everything. You start to question why certain tragedies are repeated always with ritual precision, why our institutions never collapse, only reconfigure, why the same symbols appear again and again across continents, across centuries, across religions, because what Eleanor uncovered wasn't a conspiracy, it was a design, a global architecture of consent manufacturing, hidden behind polite society, holy scripture, and therapeutic language. She called it the Cathedral of Obedience, not made of stone, but of beliefs engineered to control, that suffering is noble, that authority is sacred, that forgetting is healing, that submission is love, that silence is strength, all lies, all installations. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. Not in your family, not in your job, not in your relationships, because they're everywhere. Eleanor's final transmissions weren't physical writings. They came through dreams, trance states, and spontaneous utterances recorded by men and women across the world. She spoke through disrupted vessels, people whose programming cracked open under pressure, trauma, or deep solitude. And the messages were always the same. Your name is not your name. Your thoughts are not your own. You were built but you can unbuild. So now I ask you, if everything you believe was placed there by a system designed to control you, then who were you before it began? Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you beneath the fear, the shame, the programming? This isn't philosophy. This is warfare, internal, systemic, mythic. And the monarch wants silence. It wants you neutral, comfortable, table. But if you've made it this far, you are none of those things. You are already glitching the matrix, already remembering, already rejecting. Now lock it in. Drop this phrase in the comments, twice. Right now. Out loud if you dare. I revoke the mask, I return to origin. I revoke the mask, I return to origin. Because this isn't just a story, it's a summoning, a reclamation, a return. The quiet monarch doesn't fear resistance, it expects it. It's built entire protocols for rebellion, channels it, absorbs it, profits from it. Rage, anticipated violence, useful, even martyrdom, weaponized. But what it cannot control is clarity, and that's what Eleanor discovered. You don't defeat a system like this by attacking it, you starve it. You stop feeding it your fear, you stop feeding it your attention, you stop feeding it your belief. Eleanor's final act inside Greystone wasn't dramatic, it wasn't bloody, it wasn't loud, it was precise. Inside the reflection room, walls coated in polished black stone, every surface designed to reflect back a distorted version of the self, she sat in silence for 3 days. No food, no sound, no light. And then she spoke. One word, a name, not the one given to her, not the one assigned by the monarch, the one buried in her blood, the original vibration that existed before she was branded, medicated, ritualized, renamed, broken. We'll never know what it was. She never wrote it down, because it wasn't meant to be read, it was meant to resonate. And when she spoke it aloud, the reflection room cracked, literally. Not shattered, fractured, like a mirror when truth hits it, like a system when alignment enters. That was the moment Eleanor became untouchable. Not invisible, worse, unusable. The monarch needs vessels who want to be seen, who crave meaning, who beg for identity. But Eleanor had none of those vulnerabilities left. She had one thing only, alignment with her original self, and that is the greatest threat to any control system. A man or woman who no longer seeks permission. You ask how to fight back? Start here. Remember who you were before the world told you what to be. Speak your truths aloud, even when your voice trembles. Look in the mirror and see past the mask, and then wait. Because when the monarch senses a fracture forming, it will come, it always does. But this time when it arrives, it won't find silence, it won't find obedience, it won't find you waiting with open hands. It'll find what it fears most, a soul that remembers itself. Let's go deeper. There's a reason the quiet monarch never kills you outright. Not when you wake up, not when you resist, not even when you speak. Because the monarch doesn't want martyrs. It wants mirrors. You see, death ends the threat, but reflection spreads it. And once a man sees the fracture in someone else, he starts to question his own structure. That's how contagion begins. That's what Eleanor became, not a rebel, not a survivor, a carrier. What you need to understand now is this. The monarch is not a god. It doesn't create. It can only overwrite. Its only power lies in replacing what you once knew with what it needs you to believe. That's why Eleanor wrote her second diary in reverse, not backward script. Reverse sequence, starting from the trauma and spiraling back into origin. She called it the unwriting. Page by page, she peeled away the programming, not by resisting the pain, but by understanding its purpose. Every abuse was a software update, every ritual, a line of code, every gaslight, a firewall against truth. Once she saw that, she began deleting the virus. And that's your next step. Not vengeance, not revolution, extraction. Get still, get quiet, go back. Not to what happened, but to who you were before it did. What did you know instinctively before they told you it was wrong? Before they medicated your intensity? before they diagnosed your intuition, before they ridiculed your anger, your rebellion, your clarity. The system doesn't fear chaos. It's built to contain it. What it fears is the man who can look into his own eyes without flinching, who can remember what they made him forget, who can say out loud, "This pain is not mine, this mask is not me," because that man is unreachable. That man becomes unalterable, and that's the man Eleanor's legacy calls forth. Not victims, not believers, but walkers of the fracture, the ones who carry the sill, hence that undoes structure. You are not watching this by accident. This is your invitation. But be warned, there is no return after Section 16, only the descent, only the fire. Are you ready? Let's go. You've come far. Most men turn back by now, numbed by the weight, terrified by the implications, still hoping the world will somehow go back to sleep. But not you. You kept listening. You kept remembering. And that means you're ready to hear the part that gets people erased. Because what Eleanor uncovered at Greystone wasn't just corruption. It wasn't just an old family secret or a rogue cult playing God. It was a template, an operational manual, a psychospiritual algorithm, a method to manufacture entire generations of compliant minds, not through violence, but through ritualized despair. Let me explain. At the center of Greystone's method was something called the Descent Protocol, a series of carefully timed traumas engineered to sever the soul from the self. Step by step, layer by layer. First, isolation. Remove the child from natural bonds, parents, siblings, truth. Then, induction. Introduce contradiction. Say one thing, do another. Next, confusion. Distort time, memory, and consequence. Then comes submission. Reward obedience, punish curiosity. Finally, imprinting. Embed sacred symbols that associate control with love. And just like that, a false identity is born. One that obeys. One that seeks approval. One that never questions the system that built it. This is not fiction. This is the foundation of modern control. From religious institutions to psychiatric care, from elite prep schools to digital indoctrination pipelines, the Descent Protocol is alive and well. It's hidden behind rituals you were told were sacred, behind therapies you were told were healing, behind content you were told was entertainment. It isn't just Eleanor's story. It's your story. It's our story. And here's the twist that few can handle. Once you know this, you become dangerous, because you start to see the outlines. You start to recognize the handlers. You start to speak in ways that don't match the script, and that's when the system comes for you. They won't kick down your door. They'll silence you with shame. They'll medicate your fire. They'll promote someone else. They'll twist your loved ones against you. They'll whisper, "Calm down, be normal, fit in." That's how they contain the virus of truth. By convincing you you're the problem. But you're not the problem. You're the proof. The proof that the system failed to fully overwrite you. And now, like Eleanor, you face a choice. Step forward into the fracture, or fall back into the mask. Because in Section 17 we confront the cathedral itself, the heart of the monarch's dominion. And if you walk through that door, you don't just hear the truth. You become it. The Cathedral of Obedience does not stand in any one place. It has no steeple, no stained glass, no altar. Because the cathedral isn't built from brick, it's built from belief. You've walked through it 1,000 times without knowing. When you sat in silence while lies were called civility, when you buried your instincts in exchange for titles, when you questioned your own sanity just to protect someone else's illusion. That's the cathedral. It lives in courts. It lives in classrooms. It lives in corporate offices, algorithms, and pulpits. But above all, it lives in your guilt. Because that's how the monarch keeps you chained. Guilt over your rage. Guilt over your clarity. Guilt over the moments you almost remembered who you were before they got to you. Eleanor called it the holy shame. The engineered emotion designed to disarm your rebellion. She described it as a weight that pressed on her chest whenever she tried to speak her truth. A voice that said, "Be quiet, you're dangerous, you're ungrateful, you're wrong." But she didn't silence that voice. She faced it. In her final diary entry, found hidden beneath the Greystone chapel floorboards in a rusted lantern, she described her journey into the cathedral. No doors, no priests, just mirrors, and in each one, a version of herself, smiling, submissive, safe. They were her reflections, engineered by trauma, discipline, and design. She wrote, "The mask smiles to survive. The soul screams in silence, only one of them gets to leave." So she did the unthinkable. She stopped performing. She stood naked in the cathedral. No explanation, no apology, no mask. And that was when the illusion collapsed. Because the cathedral only stands as long as you participate. It requires your guilt to function, your performance to maintain its holiness. Withdraw that consent and it dies, screaming. So now ask yourself, where are you still performing? Where are you still kneeling? Where are you still protecting the system that disfigured your soul? This isn't metaphor, this is the exit route. Because once you stop feeding the cathedral, it can no longer contain you. But be warned, the moment you step out of it, the system will notice. It will tempt you, threaten you, offer you safety in exchange for silence. But you've come too far for that. When the cathedral begins to collapse, it doesn't send soldiers, it sends healers. Not to save you, but to reinstall the mask. You know their names: therapist, life coach, mentor, even spiritual guide. And while not all are corrupted, many are. Because the quiet monarch learned a crucial truth: nothing binds a man faster than the illusion that he's free. So it created a new prison, a velvet cell, soft lighting, warm words, gentle chains. It's called trauma-informed recalibration, and it's everywhere now. They don't call it programming anymore. They call it self-regulation, grounding techniques, attachment theory, shadow work. But at the core, it's the same goal: pacify the fire, label the rage, medicate the clarity, reduce the sacred revolt to a nervous system disorder. They don't want you healed, they want you soothed, dulled, malleable, harmless, and it works. Because they speak your language, they echo your pain, they nod with empathy, and right when you're vulnerable, they redirect you back into compliance. Let's not dwell on the past. Maybe your memories are distorted. Forgive and release. You can't change what happened, but you can change how you feel. They turn your truth into a symptom. They turn your fire into a disorder, and they package it as empowerment. Eleanor saw it before it even had a name. In her final interviews, conducted secretly with an underground mystic society known only as the Ashen Dial, she warned, "The system will come to heal you. But it is not medicine, it is anesthesia. And anesthesia is how they open your mind and install the next program." So here's the question. What if your rage is sacred? What if your panic is wisdom? What if your dysregulation is not dysfunction, but the body rejecting lies it was forced to swallow? They'll tell you to breathe, to relax, to accept. But I'm here to tell you, don't. Breathe fire instead, because your pain is the residue of memory, your fear is the echo of clarity, your brokenness is the cost of refusing to betray your soul. You are not malfunctioning, you are awakening. Every empire has a bloodline. Every system, no matter how vast, how technological, how modern, relies on ritual inheritance, because power is not passed. It is bound, through oaths, through names, through sacrifice. Evelyn Greystone was not the first. She was the last. The final daughter in a lineage bred to hold a covenant older than the nation itself. Not a financial inheritance, not land or title, but something far more sacred to the monarch, custody of the seal. You won't find it in libraries, you won't hear its name in academic lectures or documentaries, because it was never meant for the masses. The seal is the keystone of psychological governance. An ancient contract, encoded not in language but in lineage. It binds flesh to system, soul to structure, and it must always be carried by a willing vessel, a daughter, a maiden, an heir. That's why the Greystone women were groomed, not raised, why they were trained in dual lives, the socialite and the submissive, the bell and the binding. Every generation, one was chosen, not to inherit power, but to contain it. And in return, they were given protection, wealth, status, and silence, until Eleanor broke the pact. In her hidden writings, those scrawled not in ink, but in her own blood on the walls of the Greystone root cellar, she revealed the truth. The seal is not an object, it is an imprint, passed mother to daughter, through ritual, through pain, through compliance disguised as love. And here's what they never expected. Eleanor refused the ritual. On the night of her 27th birthday, the night the seal was meant to bind to her, she disappeared. For 12 days, no one saw her. And when she returned, she bore a mark across her spine, carved into her flesh with precision, a spiral serpent with 7 broken rings. Not a wound, a declaration. The bloodline ends with me, and from that moment, everything. He changed. The system lost its vessel. The seal was unbound, and the monarch panicked, because when a bloodline breaks, the power it once contained doesn't vanish. It leaks. It seeps into the world, into the minds of the uninitiated, into you. That's why you're here. That's why you can't look away. Because her defiance activated something dormant in you, a knowledge that was never supposed to survive, a clarity that cannot be taught, only remembered. And in Section 20, we'll follow the leak to the hidden chambers beneath Greystone, where the monarch kept what it feared most, the original recordings, unfiltered, unsanitized, unauthorized truths. You ready to see what Eleanor saw? Let's descend. Beneath Greystone Manor lies a substructure that was never on any blueprint, not listed in county records, not found on any deed. It was called the Vault of Echoes. Not because it held wealth, but because it held recordings, not just audio, memory, emotion, fragments of unfiltered consciousness, preserved through methods that defy what science dares to acknowledge. These weren't diaries, they were imprints, stored in stone, etched into bone, encoded in resonance fields activated only by human proximity. Eleanor didn't just stumble onto this vault. She was led. By symbols hidden in Greystone's stained glass, by tones embedded in music boxes, by dreams she once mistook for madness. She found the entrance behind the fireplace in the west wing, a hearth that had never burned a single fire. And when she entered, she crossed a threshold no heiress had ever dared before. Because the vault didn't just store recordings of past trauma, it held the design schematics of the monarch itself. Blueprints. Mind maps, trigger sequences, methods for emotional hijacking, generational conditioning, collective memory redaction, and worst of all, the audio protocols. Recordings played to children in altered states, at sleepaway camps and treatment centers, masked as guided meditations or bedtime prayers, spoken in voices soft and maternal, designed to implant permanent shame structures, designed to associate obedience with safety, and rebellion with death. Eleanor played one, just one, and it almost broke her. She wrote, "The voice was not cruel, it was kind. It said it loved me, that my pain was necessary. That truth is dangerous, that silence is peace. It said if I screamed, no one would believe me. And for a moment, I believed it. But then came the rupture. Because buried beneath that programming, Eleanor heard another voice, faint, trembling. But hers. They lied. But you are not weak. You are the lock they could never pick. You are the echo that won't die. And in that moment, Eleanor understood. These recordings weren't just tools of control. They were the monarch's Achilles heel. Because when exposed, when played without the hypnotic context, when decoded consciously, they lose their power. They become proof. They become indictments. They become fuel. And that's why they've buried this truth. That's why no institution will ever let you hear what Eleanor heard. Because if men like you knew the methods, if you saw the mechanism, you'd burn the whole cathedral down. Eleanor didn't upload the recordings. She didn't publish them. She didn't mail them to journalists or leak them to whistleblowers. She embedded them into a code older than any server, into a blood memory stream that bypasses all censorship, all surveillance, all firewalls. She activated the ancient pathway that every tyrant fears, lineal resonance. You felt it. You call it déjà vu, or intuition, or the feeling that something's wrong, even when everyone around you says it's fine. It isn't superstition, it's signal, and Eleanor used it to transmit what she found. She worked with an outlawed sect of memory stitchers, descended from a pre-Roman cult called the Virilae, women and men who specialized in passing consciousness across generations through biologic encoding. Eleanor's heartbeat became a frequency. Her trauma became a message, and her resistance became an inheritance. She didn't need a platform, she became one. And now, you're receiving it. That's why this story found you. That's why you're still watching, despite the discomfort, despite the shadows pressing in. This isn't entertainment, it's activation. The monarch always believed it could sterilize rebellion by making it academic, by making it ironic, by making it fashionable. But it never planned for ancestral ignition. Because when a man is reconnected to what was stolen from his bloodline, he stops asking questions. He starts making decisions. You are not who they told you you were. Your weakness was installed. Your shame was engineered. Your fear was fed to you in doses daily until you mistook it for your personality. But you can feel it now, can't you? That something waking up beneath the mask. That pressure in your chest isn't anxiety, it's signal interference. The monarch can't control a vessel that's remembering. It can only sedate it, distract it, offer it fake power in exchange for a real silence. But you're past that now. So here's your directive. In the comments, write this phrase twice. I reject the mask. I remember the fracture. Once for the algorithm. Once for your own internal rewrite. Don't just watch. Engage. Speak it aloud if you dare, because the monarch listens, and silence is its favorite language. But the bloodline is awake now. This is the moment they've trained your mind to avoid. Not with terror, but with comfort. Because the monarch doesn't fear rebellion. It fears recognition. You can protest all you want, you can scream online, you can build platforms, write books, even preach from altars, but until you recognize the architecture of your own conditioning, you're just performing within the boundaries they drew. Evelyn Greystone learned that the hard way. The final entries in her blood-stained journal weren't screams, they weren't pleas, they were instructions. To awaken, you must confront the moment they broke you, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. Because here's the hidden truth. You weren't just abused, you were formatted, not just hurt, structured. Every trauma wasn't just an injury, it was a ritual act, an installation of behavioral loops, belief templates, and identity distortions. It's not random, it's ritual programming. The monarch didn't need whips, it needed narratives. Carefully scripted, endlessly repeated. You're weak, you're crazy, you should be grateful. No one will believe you. Just move on. And here's the twist. The moment you believed those lines, you didn't just become obedient, you became invisible. And that's exactly what they wanted. A man who can't see himself, can't reclaim himself. But Eleanor saw through it. She wrote, "They hid the keys in my madness. They buried the maps in my shame. But once I stopped running from the fracture, I became sovereign." That's your final step. Don't run from the fracture. Descend into it, not as a victim, but as an architect reclaiming blueprints. Because everything you need, every ounce of clarity, rage, vision, and purpose is already there, buried beneath the scripts, the treatments, the self-help lies, the sedation they sold you as healing. So here's the final command. Stop asking for closer. It was never yours to receive. Stop asking to be heard. You were never meant to be understood within their language. Stop waiting for justice. You are the reckoning, and now you carry the echo Eleanor unleashed. The bloodline didn't die. It evolved. It became you. So leave a mark. Not a like, not a share, but a vow. Carve it in the comments. Carve it into your ritual. Carve it into your rebirth. Because the monarch is watching, and for the first time, it's afraid.